I believe it's true because there's a lot of evidence, even if some of the stories are made up, that animals can show mercy. Animals have more mercy in their bones and blood than most humans on the planet, wild or domesticated. They've proved not only they show mercy to other animals, they show it to people, which I don't understand why they should rip us apart, since we are nothing but jerks that only care about ourselves. Yes, animals are unpredicted, but I would trust an animal than a person to save myself. Animals are such good-hearted things to have on this planet, and it would be a shame to lose them. Animals do what they do based on their own needs at the time. If they're not hungry and not feeling like hunting, they will not hunt a prey creature. If the prey creature doesn't behave like prey, they may decide not to hunt it for that reason. It isn't about mercy. It's about whether they're hungry or wish to hunt. As humans, our empathy is so strong that we can really become distressed that others are suffering. And we apply it not only to other humans, but to animals as well. That empathy drives our instinct in forming a highly socialized society. Any animal species can be patient because their personalities are as individual as ours are. Sure, there are certain characteristics that are ingrained in instincts that are followed, like a tiger or a house cat, both covering their meals after eating, either with sticks or leaves or a nearby bed and blanket. But many animals, again, not unlike people, can be empathetic, fearful, joyful, playful, social, even altruistic. The father threw his son off the rails, but what the bear did was an amazing story about how a moose stole a child right in front of his father, thus saving the child from death. Maxie and Matilda got married when they were both 17 years old, which caused all the villagers to attend their wedding ceremony, and everyone was amazed by the great love story that concluded. The two got married a month after the two got married, but Tilda found out she was pregnant, and then she and her husband were very happy and started preparing to receive their first child. They set aside a small room for the new boy, brought in a wardrobe and a small bed, and bought clothes and toys to welcome him. The couple not only planned to have one child, they wanted more because, as usual, the village family must have many children. When it was time to give birth to Matilda, Max called his friend that he had to take care of his wife to the hospital, but he told him that his car had broken down. Then the young man became very nervous and immediately called the ambulance. The ambulance arrived so late that Matilda completely collapsed while her husband kept hugging her and trying to calm her down. When the ambulance arrived, the young woman had gone to the hospital, where she was immediately transferred to the maternity care. The young man was waiting. After a few moments, the nurse came out and told him that his wife would not be able to give birth naturally and she'd have surgery, which made him more worried. 5 hours after the operation, the doctor came out with a pale face and told the husband that his wife died in the operating room and the little boy survived. At the last minute, Max was shocked when he heard what the doctor said and started screaming with all his might. He couldn't imagine that his wife, whom he loved and with whom he had dreamed of living all his life, was gone forever and would not return. In addition, he ran to the operating room where his baby was crying. The young man didn't want to see his son, who was in good health, because he considered him the cause of the death of the love of his life. Moreover, he refused to take it at first in his hands, but the nurses tried to calm him down and told him that the boy needed help. When the doctor noticed that the father was in a difficult psychological state, he asked the nurses not to give him the son because he might hurt him. He then told Max that he could go home and come back after a week to take the child. Max wasn't thinking about the little boy at all when they called him from the hospital to get his son. He told them that he didn't want to see them and that they should get rid of him. When Matilda's grandfather, Antonio George, found out what had happened to his grandson, he went to the hospital and brought his grandson to live with him in the house, where she took care of him and brought him everything he needed. 6 months passed and the father of the child did not appear, so he completely ignored him and did not admit to what the child from across. Grandpa tried to call him and ask him to go see his little one and hold him in his hands because he needed him, but he didn't speak to him and ignored him each time. Once the grandfather decided to see Max, since he took his grandson in his arms and he left and went to look for him at the house. But he didn't find him there, and when he asked him about, one of the neighbors told him that he always went to the highway track near the woods and sits there. Then the grandfather immediately went to the railway to look for the husband of his late granddaughter. When he got there, he found the young man sitting on the railing with a bottle of wine in his hand. He was really drunk. The grandfather approached him and tried to talk to him, but he was almost unconscious and he refused to speak at all. Although he placed his child on his chest, he didn't care. The grandfather lost hope and decided to return to his house, but at that moment he noticed a moose stuck on the riverbank. The fooled river was approaching, and it was very quickly, but he put his grandson on the ground and ran to the moose and pulled it out. The drowning at the last moment, the water nearly hit him. Grandpa was terrified, but he rejoiced when he realized that he had managed to save the little moose. Meanwhile, a large moose appeared, probably the mother of the little animal, when she approached the grandfather. So the grandfather left the little moose and came back to carry his grandson, and then he quickly ran away from her in that place because he was afraid that the wild animal moose would attack him. Grandpa was walking and looking back because the moose and his baby were following. He didn't understand what they wanted from him since they didn't want to hurt him. Otherwise, they'd rush to catch up. Grandpa thought that he might want to thank him for what he had made of her, but they couldn't find a way to do it. The moose came every day with her cub and would sit in front of Grandpa's house for a while. Then he'd go away. Then Antonio, even over, realized that the two animals were peaceful and wanted a friendship with them, then offered them food and water. He went over to them and gently touched them as his 2-year-old grandson came over, and the little moose played with him. One day the father, Max, came to the grandfather's house and told him that he wanted to take his baby because he decided to remarry and wanted to rebuild his life. The news pleased the grandfather very much, and he gave the baby to his father and gave him clothes and things, and then said goodbye to him with tears in his eyes. The grandfather went every day to visit his grandson, and he was very happy that his father had taken care of him and was planning to marry a young woman she had recently met named Zelda. Days passed and the moose and the little cub didn't go to visit Antonio George's house, which made the grandfather think that they'd move to live somewhere else. However, one day while the grandfather was sitting in the yard of the house, he saw the moose and the baby approaching his house. In addition, they smiled sheep, eagerly await her arrival, and when they got to her, she noticed that the mother moose had something in her mouth. Yes, it was a little boy. In addition, when the moose placed it on the ground, the grandfather approached him, and there he was, dumbfounded. The child was his grandson, whom he'd left days ago at his father's house. He was calm, but exhausted by the way the moose carried him into the house. After the grandfather reassured himself about the grandson's condition, he immediately picked him up and went to the police to tell them what had happened, and when the police began to investigate the incident, they discovered that the father, Max, suddenly remembered his ex-wife and got himself drunk and then carried his son into the hands and headed for the highway. In addition, he put it there on the iron bridge, kept drinking alcohol. Then he lost consciousness and fell asleep on the edge of the track while his son sat on the tracks. And when the express train approached, the moose intervened and threw the boy away at the last moment, then immediately took him to his grandfather's house and left his father sleeping there. The moose returned the favor for the grandfather that he saved his son months ago and saved his grandson from certain death. After his addicted father overlooked him, the police warned Max that custody of the son would be taken away from him if he were neglected in the future. However, the father regretted what happened and promised them that this wouldn't happen again. He decided to marry his girlfriend Zelda right away, and they took care of the little boy all the time. Therefore, Max decided to stop addicting pills and alcohol completely and began to devote all his time to his son, who became very loved and attached to him on his part. The moose and his little one returned to visit grandfather Antonio George at his house. He started spending most of his time at his house, and Grandpa started taking his grandson to his house to play with his wonderful animals. Don't get me wrong, animals have rich emotional lives, but they aren't the same emotional lives that we live. They can only experience emotions as a lion, not as a human. What seemed horrible and heartbreaking to me was doing what was best for the lioness surviving cubs. She couldn't stop every time. The weaker cub needed rest, and she couldn't continue to give resources. In order to ensure that poor little cub's survival, her milk needs to be given to her healthy cubs and not support the weakest. An animal is placed here to serve a purpose, whatever. Not only are they there for a purpose, they're also here to ensure the survival of their species. And finally, since the dawn of time, it's been humans who show a profound lack of mercy for their fellow humans, for animals, for our environment, and for our planet. Odd that we who can feel such profound empathy and mercy can turn around and commit horrific acts of violence.